they're growing. The queen is laying, pollen's coming in. The weather is really unreliable in April in Maine, and it gets a little better in May. I'm feeding them just, depending on the weather. The nectar basically is trees and dandelions. That's the main nectar flow. When I say trees, I mean the fruit trees and the maples, the willows, all of that. Swarm control will be happening towards the more into May, and splitting colonies, putting supers on, culling out old frames that need to be taken out of the boxes so you can rotate frames, and check in for Varroa mites. So when they come out of the winter, you're going to see different strengths in your colonies. If you have more than one, you're going to have things to compare to. So I consider a strong hive when it's 8 to 10 seams of bees. And this colony here, if you can see my mouse pointer, that's the strong hive. A medium hive would be 4 to 6 seams of bees, and a weak hive would be 3 or less. And these are half seams. So if I added that all up, it would be in my it would be a little hair over my weak category, but it's the weaker of, it's usually the weaker of what I see. And so you need to evaluate your bees when you first get a peek in there at them, and you need to know the food stores are really important in April, especially if it rains a lot. Especially the strong colonies, they eat more, of course, than a weaker colony is going to. So you need to watch for starvation. You need to consider equalizing. I would equalize. I would take some away from this strong colony, some capped brood, and I would put it into this weaker colony. And I want capped brood when I do that, not open larvae, because they might have a hard time controlling the temperature for more brood since there's less bees. But with capped brood, that brood's going to be coming out sooner, and it's not so susceptible to the cold as open larvae is. I would monitor the medium colonies very closely to make sure they kept growing. And the weak, of course, as I said, they need to be combined, or they need to be taken out of the operation, shaken out into the yard so they join other hives, as long as you know they don't have a disease. Or they need to be watched more closely. They may need a new queen. That might be why they're weak. So later in the season, when you can get down into them, I wouldn't really do a complete inspection till the days are in the 60s. That's when you're going to evaluate if it's the problem with the queen. So feeding is necessary. Watching for robbing, even in the spring, is necessary. I generally open feed when I will open feed in spring. That means I will feed them in their yard for 2 reasons. It keeps bees out of trouble. If you're in a neighborhood where the bees could bother people, and also when it's cold outside, they can't fly very far, so you're not going to get robbers coming into your yard after that syrup when it's cold out, because they only can fly so far. So open feeding, when your neighbor doesn't have a colony right next door, say the colonies are 1/4 mile or 1/2 mile away, it's safe to do that in your own yard, because those colonies that are 1/4 mile, 1/2 mile away aren't going to be flying that far on a cool day. So when I equalize, I want to see the age of the capped larvae that I'm putting into the colony that I'm trying to get strong, because I don't want to create more work. I don't want that weak colony to have to feed larvae. So I'm going for capped brood. And the big colony is going to peak and probably swarm, so they need to lose some of that capped brood. Colonies that will peak before the population, peak in population before the main flow, they're more likely to swarm than ones that peak after the flow. They're the ones that are going to swarm, those ones that peak before a flow. So equalizing prevents this from happening. Colonies, they time their queen rearing to coincide with the population peak and with drone maturity. So that's one way you can tell that they're going to get ready to swarm, other than seeing true evidence of it by seeing queen cells and etc. Strong ones, if you can control them by equalizing, you can still get a honey crop and you won't get the swarm during the nectar flow, so you're losing your honey. So it's important not to have that swarm during the nectar flow, or you lose your honey production. So when you equalize, if you're equalizing and you don't find the queen though, you have to shake all the bees off the frame. So if I was moving a frame from my strong colony into my weaker colony, but I don't know where my queen is, I'm moving a capped frame of brood, I can scrape off a capping and look for the eye color. That's going to give me a good idea of the age of when those bees will emerge out of the cell. And so I want to not move bees on the frame if I don't know where my queen is. If I know where my queen is, then I can safely just give them also the bees on the frame. So you're going to give cap brood when you equalize. Pupae from one frame of sealed brood, when they emerge as adults, they cover close to 3 cells when they're walking on the frame. So it really greatly expands the population in the colony. It's a 3-to-1 expansion basically, because when this worker crawls out and she's standing on these cells, her body will cover 3 of these cells. So that's why it's a 3-to-1 expansion. So you get one chance at your spring flow. So you really have to get your colonies ready for that. And that means not letting the strong colonies swarm and equalizing the weak colonies into stronger colonies so they can make honey for you. The only problem that I ever had in spring on cold, wet springs was with European foul brood. That is a stress-related disease. So you really want to watch for that. When you're equalizing your colony, look at the brood, even though you're not transferring open brood, look at the open brood carefully for symptoms of European foul brood, which is going to also called EFB. If you see any yellow, juicy looking stuff, it looks like they're floating in orange juice. This is a bad case, and this is a real mild case. Now, in the past, I've been able to always catch it at this, and I can turn it around very quickly with feeding. It is something that you can turn around very quickly when you catch it in time. So it starts appearing in early spring, and when the forages increase, so they're leaving the hive, it results in fewer bees in the hive performing nursing duties. And then the larvae become stressed, they become chilled, and they can be hungry too. So when you need that ratio of nurse bees and larvae to stabilize. And one thing you can do is feed them so some of those forages stay home, and that way the brood stays warm. And they really can recover really quickly when you feed them. You can give them a protein supplement patty, and you can give them syrup. And it really makes conditions in the hive much more favorable for getting them to recover from that. I've never had to use any other treatment for European foul brood besides that. And you just have to do that until there's an increase in temperature, until there's an increase in flowers. You need warm sunny days and warm temperatures in a nectar flow. But until then, you can stimulate them by food and protein, by syrup and protein. But the other thing is you could put the sleeve back over there, you know, around them, an insulating sleeve around the colony to help them stay warm too, if it's turned quite chilly and you're seeing problems. A colony that expands too fast can increase your chance of having European foul brood because the queen is laying too fast and they can't keep the brood warm. So in May, when I would be like the beginning of May, end of April, if I was in the colonies and didn't have a lot of time, what I got in the habit of doing is using my cell phone and snapping pictures, close-up pictures of brood. So when I got home, I could, look at it in a large size on my computer. And a lot of times that's when I would catch this. I would catch it in a photo. So it's a good idea if you're in a hurry, snap a couple pictures. That doesn't take long, and then look at them later when you have time. I would look at them later in the evening. So spring buildup, the tendency for the queen to expand the brood nest upward, it's because of the temperature response. It's because your inner cover is right up here, and that's holding the heat. So you're going to have a nectar flow from the trees. And bees don't usually store the nectar from the trees. That nectar is consumed almost right away. That it's not a crop that's stored from apple and maple. If you notice, you're not putting on honey supers that time of the year because the bees are eating things as fast as it's coming in. They'll be using the pollen to raise brood. They don't even really make bee bread out of it. Sometimes they eat it down so fast. They build up rapidly for 10 weeks from May to the middle of July, and that's when you're going to really take advantage of them wanting to grow. And in May, they shift from consuming. That's when they shift from consuming nectar to storing nectar, and that also is weather dependent. And that's when you got to think about putting on your honey supers. So the queen is going to be up in the top box early spring because she wants to be under that inner cover where it's warm. They expand the brood nest upward, and that ensures that the brood nest is in close contact with the honey supply also, because a lot of times some of the honey is up in the top frames. Surplus pollen is placed, of course, around this surrounding brood nest. But generally, I'm telling you, there's not a lot of surplus pollen early in the spring. Surplus honey is largely stored to the sides of the brood because we don't have our supers on. And the combs next to the hive wall, they're usually avoided by the queen because they're cold. They're going to be colder than the internal combs. So she's going to be, if you're looking for your queen, she's going to be right in here in the top box. The buildup during this buildup, you can it's a good time to make your nukes too, because if you have a strong colony and they're all strong and you can't equalize, you have a good chance of swarming. So you're better off keeping your bees and making a couple nukes if you can out of them, instead of losing half your bees. If you don't want that many hives, you can always combine them back later after the buildup slows down, or you can start another bee yard or whatever. Another thing that's building up, though, as your bees are building up, is Varroa mites. And if you're a beginner, I really recommend you go to the University of Gulf and watch the Varroa checking video. So you can do, they do a powdered sugar check and they do a alcohol wash check. So you can learn how to do that. This is what you're going to look for right here to go to their research center. They have a lot of videos on a lot of different things like queen rearing, splitting colonies, mite checks, everything. I like to treat Varroa in the spring before the population takes off. When the bee population starts to increase, the Varroa mite population starts to increase. So I usually do an early spring check, mite treatment. Spring it's really important time to check the mite levels, because you want to start off with a low mite level in spring so you can start the season off with a clean, strong colony. So then after that I check for Varroa monthly, and as you can see, in this graph, the mites from, this is from Randy Oliver's website, the mites build up, the bees build up. This is April, May, this is June and May right here, but you can see April, May, they're really building up and the mites are really building up. And eventually the mites become stronger than the bees basically. And when you get into this gap area right here, your hive's in big trouble. Basically, your hive's probably going to be dead. So there, we had a speaker at at the County Club, Cumberland County Club, and she talked about this this apiary where they took a donor hive, this hive in yellow, they let it have Varroa mites. The other hives were, they called them receiver hives, and there was no robbing. And they actually took a lot of these bees, they treated them with carbon dioxide and they marked them with red marker. And they put little video cameras at the entrances of these hives. And they watched that these bees flew out and visited. They weren't robbing, they were being social. And they didn't really realize bees were that social, that they visited each other so frequently. But what happened was, all these colonies that were mite free at the start of it, a short while later, they were showing up with a Varroa mite problem from these visiting bees going out around that apiary. And if you want to read that study, it's Accelerated Varroa Destructive Population Growth in Honeybees. That's the name of the title. And in reality, most beekeepers need to use multiple Varroa treatments through the year. Now, I remember first we didn't have Varroa. I've been keeping bees for so long. And then we had Varroa and we only had to treat in the fall. But the past couple of years, I have had to treat 3 times, spring, summer, and fall, to keep my numbers low, to keep my bees healthy. So if you wait until fall to control your Varroa, your colonies aren't going to make it through the winter. Sometimes I have a yard where I have continuous mite issues in my home yard, and I have 20 colonies 1.5 miles away that aren't getting cared for properly, and my bees continue. I do mite checks every month, and I'm fighting mites. I finally gave up. I'm not keeping bees in that yard anymore. So it's just, sometimes it's a continuous battle. So the other useful tools will be, there's a pamphlet that's free on the internet it's the MDAR Varroa mites. Is all you have to do is put that into your search engine and you'll come up with this pamphlet. And for people that aren't real sure about the miticide treatments, there's organic treatments and chemical treatments on this, and acid treatments. It tells you the treatment, the season where it's best to be used, if you can have a honey super on, the duration of the treatment. All the information is right there in a very easy to use pamphlet. If you're having a hard time deciding, it's August, what can I put on my colonies? So I would really recommend you use that pamphlet. And one thing to remember with Formic Pro is that bees, the Formic does kill bees, mites under the cappings. So you're going to see dead mites falling out for quite a few days, and it shouldn't panic you, but you shouldn't do a mite wash to check the results of that Formic for at least 7 days after the treatment is complete, because what you're going to be picking up is dead mites in that wash. These are all dead mites. That was like 2 weeks after the treatment was on, and the mites were still coming out of cells, basically. So you just remember that with some of your treatments, the mite kill is going to be slow to come out. And when you're looking a week later and thinking your treatment didn't work, you may be looking at dead Varroa mites. So the other thing is, that's a great tool, is this website. I'm going to click that, it will bring us there. And you can enter, say starting mites are 100 right here where my mouse is, and it gives you treatment options. It tells you the efficiency rate of the percentages. You enter that under the dates, and this will tell you on this, you select what your what the exposure rate is by the colonies that are around you. So if I say I have mite troubled colonies near me, I have 100 mites starting in my wash. If I do nothing about it, I have like 10,589 mites at the end of the season, which means I have a dead hive. But you can enter, say March 15th, I put in a treatment that's 95%. My numbers go down. In June, say I put on a treatment that's 80%, my number goes down. And what I want to do is figure out, you can use this tool to figure out what, say 95%, because I'm going to use Formic for 2 weeks, it goes down. In October, maybe I start using 90%, I start using oxalic acid, I'm down to 37 mites now. And I might have to do one more cleanup November 1st because I live next to somebody that isn't taking care of their mites. I do more formic acid. I'm down to 4 mites. My bees will live through the winter. So the web address for that website is right here. It's just Chickabuzz model, and that's easy to remember. And that also is on Randy Oliver's Scientific Beekeeping as a Excel spreadsheet. I don't have Excel on my computer. I refuse to give Microsoft more money. So I use this website to do that model. So these tools will help you figure out which treatment is best for the season and tips how to use them. So I really recommend using some of these tools. The other thing that you're going to see in the spring is like right now, my bees appear are flying and I have nothing in bloom. I don't even have alder in bloom, no pussy willows. Pussy willows are just starting to turn white. So some of the bees are on a farm and they could get themselves into trouble on warmer days by flying into the livestock feed. I had that happen when I had bees in Maine. Right now I live in New Brunswick, Canada. So you want to be able to, put pollen substitute out, maybe the powdered pollen substitute out in a pail hanging in a tree or something to keep the bees out of trouble, to make so your neighbors don't get upset with you. If your neighbors say pruning their apple trees, apple sawdust from cutting apple branches smells pretty good to bees. So they're going to be all over the place over there. So just start spring foraging. Sometimes you have to give your bees some entertainment to keep them out of trouble. And that is a good thing to do, especially if you live in a tight neighborhood. So I have a little video of I spoke about how I would do open feeding. Well, I had colonies in my yard in Yarmouth, and it was a pretty tight neighborhood because I lived right in the village in Yarmouth, Maine. So it was too cold for them to fly, for anybody's bees to fly into my yard. But this feeding station was set up maybe 30 feet from 9 colonies that I wintered over there. And so to keep my bees home when people are turning over their compost pile or pruning up apple trees, I would put open feeding containers of syrup out. And it was calm enough that they could fly to get to these containers of syrup. But they stayed out of trouble in my neighbors' yards. The other thing, this one, there we go. The other thing I would put out is pollen substitute in a pail. And you could see they would go crazy over that. Now this is before the maple plants are blooming, but you might have some really mild days. You can set this up and take it down before nightfall, and it just keeps the bees in your own backyard. So the other thing that's really important with beekeeping is to plan ahead. You like getting that pollen bucket out before they need it, before they're in your neighbor's hair, feeding before it affects the brood health, having a plan if your bees come down with European foul brood, having a plan if you see swarm cells, having the equipment ready before you need it. It's all about being ahead, planning. So you can either plan 6 weeks ahead or 1 year ahead. I tend to always have a 6 week ahead plan because I know what my bees are going to be doing. So I have the equipment ready. I have the tools I need. And I also plan 1 year ahead. Now, this is part of my 1 year plan ahead. I plan on splitting a lot of my colonies this season. So last year I had my bees make a lot of frames of honey that are stored in a freezer right now. So I can feed those splits without going out to the bee yards constantly, with syrup. I'll still give them syrup, but they're certainly not going to starve because I put up 40 frames of honey. So you really have to anticipate the needs of the bees. Like if you know you're going to split and you're not going to raise queens, order those queens in January. So you know you're going to have the queens when you're going to be splitting those colonies, because if you try to order them right now, everybody's going to be sold out. So put your order in January. Say my goal is to split the middle of May or the third week in May. Get your order in, because I'll tell you, a queen producer is very happy when you cancel your order because they always have a waiting list. But if you call and try to order this time of the year, they're going to have to say, no, I don't have any queens. But if you call to cancel your order because you've changed your mind, they're happy because they need those queens for other people. They always have a waiting list. So, and you got to plan ahead about having food for the bees, how you're going to make your syrup, any extra equipment, have your feeders ready, know what you're going to do for hive manipulations, know what you're going to do for Varroa treatments. The best beekeepers are proactive, not reactive. So always try to be one step ahead of your bees. Order your mite treatments before they're out of stock. If you wait until everybody's treating mites, a lot of times what you want is going to be out of stock because everybody else wants that treatment. So order, plan ahead, plan 6 weeks ahead, or plan, even more, 2 months ahead. Have what you need before you need it. I used to manage a beekeeping supply shop, and you wouldn't believe how many people are coming in to grab a box that they have to pound together and get the frames built because they're bee swarmed and they were in a tree and they had nothing to put those bees in. So the other thing that happens in the spring is cannibalism of young larvae. When it rains a lot, the bees have been building up, they've had pollen, and this happens in Maine a lot, and all of a sudden it starts raining for a week. So and remember I said they're using that pollen as soon as it comes into the hive. They're using that pollen right up. So now they have no stores of protein. They either have to utilize the protein from their own body, or they have to cannibalize eggs and very young larvae for the protein to feed the older larvae that they have more time invested into. So you really have to plan ahead because the bees are basically living hand to mouth this time of the year. They have nothing. They don't have a lot of stores left over. It's been a long winter. That pollen's getting consumed as fast as it comes in. So have a couple pollen patties in your freezer. They build up on maple pollen, and as the weather turns bad, they may need pollen substitute to feed all the extra mouths that they've built up on. 5 days of non-foraging leads to cannibalizing of larvae younger than 3 days old. So, and a shortening, but it shortens the time that larvae is sealed also, because when the larvae is being raised and not being fed as frequently as they normally would be because there's a shortage of protein, the larvae grow slower. So it shortens the time that they are able to seal them because they want to get them sealed and not have to feed them. So they might go to bed hungry, basically. So when your pollen becomes scarce, the older larvae will get preferred treatment. So many times when I sold queens, I would, after that rainy period that we always would get in April, or I would get calls and people finally can get into their colonies and they would say they have no open brood, they lost their queen. And I would tell them to wait a week or a week and a half and check again, and they're going to have brood. And I never got the call back that they needed the queen, because they did have brood. And what they were seeing was cannibalized brood. So you don't want that to happen, because it really sets back your colony considerably. Worker jelly gets enriched by protein, and they really need that protein to make that jelly to feed those young larvae. So for me, I would start splitting my colonies around the 2 weeks after the red maple starts to bloom. The first to bloom is silver maple, then red maple, and then sugar maple. But it was the red maple that you can't say, I'm going to do it on this day, or I'm going to do it on this week in May, because it really is up to Mother Nature. So you have to watch the trees to help you know when to plan splitting your colonies. So when you see those first red maples starting to bloom, if you're going to split, you got to have your equipment ready, because in about 2 weeks, it's going to be mid-bloom, and that's when you want to split. That's because that is the best time, because the colonies are getting stronger and stronger, and the trees are reliably blooming now. We're past that yucky, cold, wet weather we can get for a week in April, and the colonies are reliably building up. So, and this is one of those topics that I call the gray area of beekeeping. And the gray areas are the ones where you're learning to watch everything around you, and not just the bees. The bees only react to what is happening around them. And you have to know what the bees are going to do by watching what's going on around them. So a lot of beekeepers will call this the art of beekeeping. Either you have it or you don't, because you can learn all of the science, all the black and white parts of beekeeping from books and the internet and such, but you're not going to learn to, when it's best in your yard to split your bees from a book. You're going to learn that by what's happening in Mother Nature. So to be a good beekeeper, you really have to watch that phenology of what's going on around you. Learn to watch the plants, watch the weather, watch the wind. They can't fly in really windy days. So say a week of severe winds is as bad as a week of rain. So, and keep records about everything. I kept records about everything. That's why I have these dates and the temperatures of when I split, because I would record it down each year so I could look back and say, well, this spring's a little different than last spring, or, well, this spring, May 19th, I didn't start splitting until then, where this 2014, I was able to start in May 8th. So it tells you, where the weather went. So, and remember that cap brood and eggs they're more sensitive. I'm sorry, I said it backwards. Cap brood and eggs are not as sensitive to temperature change as open brood. So say I'm going to take a good amount of bees out of a colony with the queen, and I'm doing a walk away split. I want to take a lot of the open brood and put that into this, where the strongest box is going to be, where the strongest amount of bees are going to be, because that's the one that's the most important to keep warm, because cap brood isn't as sensitive to cold. And one time I was working with Marla Spevik, and we were doing the when you freeze the bees to check for hygienics with liquid nitrogen. I was totally amazed how long it took the larvae under those caps to die when we poured liquid nitrogen on them, the nitrogen. It took a long time. I thought it would be like instant death, but it was like 8 minutes or so. It was a very long time. And that just shows that they're not so susceptible to the cold as open larvae is. And eggs aren't as susceptible to the cold either. So remember that when you're making your splits, keep your open brood where in the colony that's going to have the warmest colony. Of course, you're going to have to move if you're doing a walkaway split. Of course, you're going to have to leave some brood to the correct age for making a queen. And you want to keep the forages in the split. You're going to have to move it to a new yard, of course, or you're going to have to swap it with the parent hive so forages end up in the split, and you can equalize it that way. Spring buildup is another time to take advantage of that. The bees really want to do things. They really want to work. They want to draw wax. They want to make surplus honey. They want to have surplus pollen. You can set aside a frame of honey for every nucleus you plan to make. You need to always plan ahead. These are wax builders. They're festooning bees. So it's just a good time to change out that old comb, go through your colonies ahead of time, know how many new combs you need so that you can get those built to put new frames in. By now you should have a good workforce for further into the spring. Worker bees that are between the ages of 14 days and say 25 days are your wax producers. So when you want to draw comb, you need a good amount of young bees in there to make that wax. To draw comb, of course, it needs to be a nectar flow. There needs to be 4 things. And the 4 things I'm always looking for is a nectar flow, the young bees, they like darkness, and warm temperatures. You know those days when you're holding the frame in your hands and your thumb touches the comb and it just easily dents because it's so warm. Those are what I call wax making days, because it needs to be the wax needs to be, the inside of the hive temperature needs to be 95 degrees. That's the ideal temperature for comb building, because the bees can work with that wax. It's like trying to work, if you tried to work with cold Play-Doh, you couldn't form anything. But if you had warm Play-Doh, you can form things that you need to, you can form things. So it's a festooning is a behavior that you're going to see on warm days, but it's not, if it's actually, festooning is the behavior they do on cold days instead of warm days. So you can, if the temperature in the hive is below 95 degrees and they're building wax and you open the hive and you see festooning, it's because it's a way that they believe it's a way that they help raise the temperature on the frame that they're trying to put the wax on. But they don't have 100%, they don't have 100% understanding about exactly what festooning is, but it's always the wax builders that are doing it. So, so a closed hive in the summer with daytime temperatures or early spring, late spring easily reach 90 in the 90s for temperature. Backfilling is another thing you're going to see in the spring. As bees consume winter stores, the queen uses those empty cells to lay in to expand the brood nest. Those bees emerge, and then the nectar flow starts, and they'll start putting nectar into the brood nest where the queen should be laying. So you have to watch for that during the spring nectar flow. The colony will shift from consuming honey stores and consuming nectar as soon as it's coming in to storing nectar. And that's a beyond the notification that the nectar flow has started. Okay, by this point you're a little too late with getting your supers on. the consumption of honey is what frees up the additional cells for the expansion of the brood nest. Like in the fall, up here in New Brunswick, we feed 3 gallons of syrup to the bees to get them ready for fall. So through the first couple of weeks of October, I was getting my bees to put up 3 gallons of syrup. So every single frame in my colony was just bulging with honey, capped honey. And because I have a long winter up here, I mean, my bees are still in the colonies. They're not foraging for anything. And I haven't had to feed, and they're still wrapped. So I can't even get in there to feed them syrup, and it's too cold to feed them syrup. So, but as they're consuming that honey, the queen's laying in those frames. So that if I let that go too far, when I went into a nectar flow, I would cause swarming. So you have to know that shift, the shift in the flow, the shift in the bees from consuming to storing is an important thing to watch. And if you super too early, that's as harmful as not supering at all, because it lowers the temperature of the colony. And say this colony is not extremely strong, you could end up with European foul brood. You'll end up with the bees ignoring the frames because they can't warm the frames up. So you have to match the strength of the colony, the weather, the type of bee you have, and what your management is. So each year and each colony is different every year, and each location is different. I had bees in Durham and I had bees in Yarmouth, and those 2 yards where I handled totally different, because one was close to the ocean and the other was inland. So you really have to know your location. So before they start refilling these cells that the emerged bees came from with XX nectar, you really have to get your supers on, but then you can't get them on too soon either. And I can't even tell you when, because that's something that's one of those gray areas that I call the art of beekeeping. You learn when that happens. You watch the bees, you watch how rapidly the bees are coming and going out of the colony. You look at your brood frames and make sure no nectar's in the center of the brood frame. So if you store your supers in a barn or a shed that's cold, if you can warm them up a little before you put them on your colonies, the bees will actually get up into them quicker because they're warmer. They don't like going on wax that's cold, especially the queen. She won't walk in a frame that's cold. So I had a pickup truck with a cap on it, and of course when that sat in the sun, it got quite warm in the cap. So I would load up my supers in there and park it in the sun for a while and heat them up and then get them out onto the colonies. If the colony has started making queen cells and making swarm preparations, adding another super is not going to stop that. So that's when you really have to consider taking other precautions against swarming. One way you can tell there's a nectar flow is by the color of the wax, on the top of the top bar of the frames. When you open a colony, if there's a nectar flow, you're going to see little bits of white wax starting to be built on top of those frames. And it could be yellow. It depends on what the nectar flow is and the race of bees you have. Some races of bees make a darker wax, but if it's this type of wax, they're just reusing old wax. They will take wax from other places and move it around. They will reuse old wax. But if it's this nice white wax, that you better get your supers on. So wax is produced according to the supply and demand. So they don't produce wax if it's unnecessary. If they don't need wax, they don't produce wax. So, but generally the newly constructed spring comb is going to be white or pale yellow. And like I said, the nurse bees, they don't like daylight. So if you have a frame in the hive, say my hand is a frame and the entrance is here, and they're not drawing the comb out right in this corner, it's because daylight's probably coming in from the entrance. So the next time I check that colony, I'm going to reverse the frame. So the part they're not drawing is on the black back wall, and the part they've drawn is towards the entrance to get, and I might rub a little wax on there because I use plastic foundation to get them interested in that. But sometimes it's because daylight is hitting the frame, and the nurse bees, those young bees don't like daylight. That really does make a difference. So this is an example. When I take pictures in my yards, I don't change the dates. You know how when you take a picture with your cell phone, it leaves the date on there. So I can look back through pictures, and I kind of can have a history of what I've done. I don't rename my pictures because I want dates. So this is the same yard. You can see it's the same hive stand. That was May 24th, 2016. I had started splitting. I have a couple nukes from another yard. I always have kept a double. There's 5 frames down here and 4 frames up there. I always keep a double nuke in my yards for resources, for extra queens, for frames of brood or whatever I need, because some of the yards, you know, like they're a 45-minute or hour drive away. I don't want to find a queenless colony and have to go back there soon, or I get into trouble, or have to put in a frame of open brood from another colony and wait 56 days before I see a new bee emerge from that colony. I want a queen right away. So so that is permanent fixture in all of my yards, having a double nuke. But you can see I probably split this colony because I have a feeder on top. I would a lot of times feed them after I split them, because I might have given them foundation instead of drawn comb to get them to draw out that comb quicker. I've got my nukes here that probably came in from another yard, and my other colonies down in the back. And then by July 12th, even though I split this colony, you can see how many supers I was able to have on there by July 12th from the Nectar Flow. And I usually would pull off, well, the first week or second week of August to extract. And you can see this double nuke, there would be a queen excluder here, and they're sharing a super, because they will share a super, they will share feeders without fighting. It's the queens that really fight when they get with each other. It's not so much the bees. And over here, I've got supers on this, supers on all the other colonies that from that Nectar Flow. And I can tell you, I do split every hive that is strong enough to split. So those would have all been split. So you can see that splitting doesn't have to really affect your honey production, and not as drastically as some people think. I still always had plenty of honey, even though I split all my colonies. It's really important in April to keep your bees well fed, and I can't stress that enough, because that is going to make or break your honey production, or your colony's health, or your colony's strength. So what hungry bees look like? Well, hungry bees aren't going to have any food in the corners around the brood. It's going to be dry. These bees aren't hungry. They have corners of honey around. They have a corner of honey. These guys have a dry cells in their corner. So there should always be food next to the brood. It could be that these guys had a frame of honey right next to them, so they didn't feel like they had to be putting food in this corner. But if there's not a frame of honey next to your brood that is open, and if there is not honey in the corner of the frames, feed those bees. And that might even be in August, because Maine has quite a good dearth in August. And a lot of times I would end up feeding bees in August if it was a drought, and it's our natural dearth period. And then on top of that, we could have a drought. So I would end up feeding bees. So don't let your bees go hungry. Just be aware of what there is for food stores in the hive. So as soon as I pull a brood frame, if I see no honey in the corner, I'm immediately looking for where the frames of honey are. Is there frames of honey? How many frames of honey do they have? Things like that. So You can really encourage your early spring buildup by supplemental feeding in your colony. And it's important to do that sometimes to have a really good, strong colony to either raise you more brood or to give you some honey. You want to really get them ready for that nectar flow, but so then you got to be aware of swarming also. So there's that fine line that I have to walk the line with the bees, So drones are a sign of a really healthy colony. Most drone brood is raised in early spring, just before swarm season, basically. Drones, they need to be sexually mature at 12. They are sexually mature at 12 to 14 days. So your bees generally aren't going to swarm before there's drones sexually mature. And I say generally or most likely not going to, because there are other factors. Swarming is reproduction, but there are the other factors that will make the bees leave the colony, and that's called absconding. It's not swarming. But if they have Varroa issues, if they have a lot of ants, if they have a predator bothering their colony, there's a chance they will abscond from that colony. So they won't, and there has been swarming during off season, what they're calling swarming, say in fall and things like that. There was a lot of that one year, but generally they're driven out by something happening. Like it could be a high Varroa count, and so they just choose to leave. I would say generally something's making them choose that, because bees aren't stupid. They know when they can do things. Like they don't want to swarm and have a virgin queen when there are no drones that are sexually mature. So, but if you see a overabundance of drone brood, of course, you're going to check your queen and make sure she's laying well. And drone brood and worker cells looks like this for any of you beginners. It's kind of like a pencil eraser popped out of the cell. And I had a rim on this colony as a spacer for sugar and pollen patties. And you can see I was a little late getting that off. This is May 3rd, so it was an early buildup, but the drones haven't emerged yet. But that's where they chose to put the drone comb, because of course, when I put frames in, it's worker comb. So queen evaluation is another thing you want to do in the spring. And the queen, like I said, that she won't go on those outside walls during cold weather unless it's the sunny side. If it's the south side of the hive and it's been very nice, sunny, clear days, you can find brood, or you can find the queen on that side of the hive. She's not going to be on the north side of the hive though in early spring. So if you're looking for your queen, there's a hint right there of where to start looking, in the center or on the south side. But the comb, the temperature of the comb needs to be 93 degrees for the queen to lay in that comb. And she's probably not even going to walk on it. If it's cold, she won't even walk on the comb. That's how the queens are. So when you give an empty comb to a colony, it takes 3 to 5 days for the queen to expand her egg laying into that comb, because the bees are going to what I call is condition it, clean it up, making it clean and shiny, and they've got to bring it up to temperature. So she's going to want to get onto that comb. So throughout the whole spring, you really want to watch the queen laying pattern, so you know how that queen is going to carry the colony through the season. I like to requeen after the summer solstice because it prevents swarming the following spring, and it gives a better winter survival. Plus, you get a nice strong brood pattern in the spring. The reason it helps prevent swarming is because she is still a young queen and she's got a lot of queen pheromone. So to know if you have a poor queen, if you don't know what that looks like, this to me, if this isn't a young queen just learning to lay, or that was just bred and maybe only 3 weeks or 4 weeks into laying, I wouldn't be real concerned. But if I came out of winter and my and say the middle of May, my brood pattern looks like this, I'm going to be concerned, because to me, what that means is the queen is laying the same frames over and over again. She's not expanding the brood nest. You don't want to see brood of all different ages on the same frame. So you can see we have some really much older brood here, larvae. We have little larvae that's just, it's not even quite a C yet. We have eggs. There's eggs over here too. That would concern me, because that means the queen is relaying the same frames over and over and over again. I'm not going to ever open that colony and see 7 or 8 nice solid frames of brood. I'm going to only ever see 3 or maybe 3.5. Pushing it might be 4 on a queen like that, that just keeps going over those same frames. So watch for your queens expanding that brood nest. And the only exception would be is if it's a new queen. That is how new queens tend to lay. And sometimes they even lay more than 1 egg in a cell, but the bees will take care of that. They'll take out the extra egg eventually. It's a good idea just to start raising a few queens for your own use. And everybody should do this. There's so many ways to do it and simple ways: walkaway splits, grafting, cell punching, on the spot queen rearing, which is also called notching. Overcrowding a hive, you can produce queen cells that way. The Miller method, the Hopkins method, I mean, you name it, there's methods to raise queens. But the best queens are raised during swarm season, and that's because it's a nectar flow. Food is abundant. You need abundant food to raise good queens. And even if you don't do it this season, consider it for next season. Get the resources you need. Just make a plan, get the resources you need, and really consider it. Because if you only need 1 or 2 queens a year, it's very simple to make 1 or 2 queens a year. You need to evaluate your queens through the season, so you know which queen you want to make a new a daughter from. Evaluate how they come through the winter, your Varroa numbers, their production, if they're defensive. And it's very simple to do because you know your bees. You can think back and say, oh yeah, I got a lot of brood out of that queen. I had to split that colony and they made a lot of honey. Or they've been stinging me a lot this summer, so I don't really want a daughter from that one. And all beekeeping is local. Every area is different with a different environment and everything. But don't try to raise a queen before those drones are mature, sexually mature. She's not going to be bred well. And she has to be fed well. It was the weather good when she was bred too. She has to fly and get bred. A lot of times packaged bees are delayed because of weather. Like you could be expecting a package of bees and they say they're delayed 2 weeks or they're delayed a week. And a lot of times if you look at the weather where your bees are coming from, there have been a lot of rain or a lot of wind and the queens aren't getting bred properly. It's not because they're not getting the job done. It's because they're trying to get their virgin queens bred, and so that the weather always delays packaged bees. It's the weather that does it. And then the other thing to consider when you're making your own queens, you don't have to worry about what happened during shipping of that queen. If you're getting the queen shipped, was she overheated or was she chilled? Because that affects the queen. They affect the quality of queen. They affect the quality of the queen, not so much of where she emerged, where she lived when she emerged from her cell. They've done a lot of studies on this. It's more what happens to her after she emerges from the cell, unless of course it was really lousy weather when the bees were trying to feed her. But 20 years ago, I used to get some of the best queens from Kona, Hawaii. but shipping was different then. They came like right away. Like, look at how long it takes to get anything these days. Like 2-day shipping in Amazon is a joke up here. It takes me 2 weeks to get something from Amazon. So I would never mail order queens, living up here, because the shipping is, the Canada Postal Service is slow, but and everything is slow these days. So you really don't depend on others, is what I'm saying. I mean, sometimes you have to because you're in a pinch, and I know there's queen breeders probably in this workshop right now, and they're probably happy to have you raise some of your own queens. Just learn not to be so reliable on others for your queens, but just make a couple or make 1 or 2 a year, because you'll be happy to have your own queens in your own yards. I'm thankful now, living in Canada, that I can raise my own queens, because the restrictions up here, I have to make out paperwork just to get the breeder in Quebec would have to make a paperwork out to mail me a queen, and I'd have to make out paperwork to get their queen. We can't cross bees from province to province here. So, and also if I ordered through the mail, if I could order from New Zealand or California or Australia, but it's just easier to do it myself. So on a small scale, you don't have to be 100% relying on others. You can really do it yourself quite easily. I'm going to test out an idea I have this year. It's like based on a cloak board. With a cloak board, you bring open brood. The simple way to do a cloak board is you bring open brood up above the cloak board. A cloak board is just like a bottom board with a queen excluder in it. And it brings the nurse bees up to that open brood. And when you get a lot of nurse bees up there and you have brood the right age, you slide in the cloak board, and that's just a sheet of sheet metal. So it cuts that colony off from the colony above. They become their own little colony, and they will know they're queenless, and they'll raise a queen. Well, I thought, why can't I do that with a piece of cardboard? I can, bees don't chew cardboard, so not very quickly if they do. So I can put a queen excluder on, bring my brood up, open brood up above, and some eggs, get the nurse bees to go up there, and then just put a piece of cardboard over the queen excluder. And I wouldn't even have to cover the cardboard all the way. I could cover it 3/4. Now, you got to remember when you cut off the ventilation to that top box, because a cloak board has an entrance, but my queen excluder with cardboard over wouldn't have an entrance. I have to have an upper entrance for that box. They have to have ventilation. So if you try that, remember about ventilation. But that is going to be something just for fun, I will try this summer, because I try to do all kinds of weird things with my bees sometimes. So, and I can't stress enough on good records. Having good records is going to make you watching the weather, watching Mother Nature, and having good records and keeping yourself organized is really going to make you an excellent beekeeper. So to get larvae the correct age, if you want to raise your own queens, you're going to have to get larvae the correct age, and you might not know what that looks like. So what you want to do is have a frame of drawn comb. So you can take out a frame ahead of time that's empty. Like this time of the year, you're going to have an empty comb in your hive, and give them a frame of foundation to get this comb you need. And you will, you need that comb. So you're going to find your queen and have her in the bottom box. If you can't find her, just put a queen excluder between your boxes and figure out what box she's in. Then you can leave the queen in that box, but take out all the capped brood and move it up above and put foundation down below. so what you want to do is make no place for her to lay. You don't want cap brood emerging, so that goes into the above the queen excluder, above or in the box the queen is not in, and you only have open brood down there, or foundation, or capped honey or pollen. What you're doing is eliminating a place for the queen to lay, and then you put this frame in, and where is she going to lay? She's going to lay in that frame because that's her choice. Okay, but sometimes, remember what I said, it can take 2 or 3 days for the queen to want to go on a new frame, but the bees are going to get this ready really, really quick because that is the queen's option. So you're going to check that frame, and when you see eggs in there, you know, in 3 days, you're going to have larvae the correct age. 3-4 days, you're going to pull that frame out, and now you have larvae that is the correct age to make your queens from. You can just throw it in, put it in the box above where you put the cap brood, and with a queen excluder in there and a piece of cardboard or a cloak board or a Snellgrove board, which is a double screen board, and they can't pass queen pheromone between the double screen because they can't touch each other. And you're going to have queen cells on that frame. So it can be quite easy, even if you don't know what age to make the queen cells out of. That just ensures that's the frame she's going to lay in, and it ensures you know what age that brood is. So when I talked about notching or on the spot queen rearing, that's what it looks like. You have brood the correct age. You pull down you break down the bottom of the cell with your hive tool, and the bees will choose that spot to make a queen cell because they have room to make the long cell like here. It gives them room. They'll repair it all, but they'll make a nice long cell. They will choose that spot if the brood is the correct age. You can see here with a knife, you can cut out those queen cells and move them around to different places. If it's on wax foundation, on plastic, you can't really do it that well. But that is one way to, get the queen cells that you need. No special equipment needed, no hardly any manipulations required, just the hive tool and being able to give that queen an empty frame that you make her lay into. And you have to identify that larvae that's 36 hours old or younger, and you can do that by giving them that frame that I showed in the last slide. If you want to try grafting, you can use that frame to try your hand at grafting, which really isn't that hard. And you don't have to graft a whole lot. You could just grab 5 or 6 cells, but I'll give you a hint about grafting. Take your hive tool and take a swipe on a plastic frame. I wouldn't do this on wax foundation, but on a plastic frame, those cells are deep enough that when you swipe it with your hive tool, you've exposed your brood. And it's very easy to pick up with any type of grafting tool and set it into one of these queen cups that you buy pre-made, and for the bees to draw it out when you put it into a queenless colony. Now, you can see this frame, I did this as an example, but I would call that too dry to graft from. See how there's not a lot of liquid in the bottom of the cells here? I might have even already grafted that one. I don't remember, but I had the picture, so I used it from doing it. And I grabbed this picture off of a website called Brood Mapper. What you want to see is this larvae floating in nice puddles of royal jelly. It makes them very easy to pick up and transfer into one of those queen cups. So Brood Mapper, I'll tell you about that website. Brood Mapper is an interactive website where you can learn to identify different stages of brood and brood development. It's kind of almost like playing a computer game. You're marking cell contents according to the age of the brood. And if you're incorrect, it won't let you do it incorrectly. So you don't have to worry. It's a good way to learn the ages of the stages and ages of brood. And it's actually a citizen science program because Ohio State University, they're investigating miticides and fungicides and the interactions it has on the effect of honeybees and the brood and development stages. So they put pictures of the brood stages up on that website, Brood Mapper. You do have to sign in to Brood Mapper. You have to make an account. And you're a volunteer there as a citizen science, marking the brood, what cells have larvae, what cells had mid-age larvae, what cells have nothing, what cells have pollen, what cells have nectar. And that way they get a count. They know the frame you're marking, they know where it came from and what product was applied to that hive. And that way they don't have to hire people to count the frames. You get the skill of how to inspect a colony by the age of brood and all of that, and they get their frames counted for them. So if you're a new beekeeper especially, and you're not real good at finding brood and eggs and knowing the ages and all that, write down the name of this website and do a couple frames for them, and they'd appreciate it. So whenever you get a colony with emergency cells, what I do, these are all different stages of brood cell, queen cells, but I'm going to tell you about emergency cells to start with, I guess. When a colony makes emergency cells, they don't always make the correct choice on the age of the larvae. So say I see a frame with a lot of emergency cells, some are open and some are capped. I scrape all the capped ones because that could mean it was made from older larvae. Anything open, and I'll show you a picture of that in my next slide, anything open probably was made with younger larvae because the bees cap it at a certain stage of growth. They're not counting days, they're looking at the stage of the growth of the queen. So just be aware of that. But for people that are new in beekeeping or just a couple years along, your colonies are always going to have what we call queen cups in them at the bottoms of the frames. That's just normal. Don't think they're swarming or making a new queen or anything because you see these. Look inside. If there's no egg, it is not a queen cell. It is just a cup. What you're going to see when you look inside for a queen cell is you'll see that little larvae growing and all that royal jelly. And then eventually it becomes, looking like a peanut. And that's a full queen cell. Now, when the queen has emerged, you can see that it's been chewed and open. And then I know I have a virgin in this hive because my queen emerged. Now, sometimes there's a little cap that swings off, and sometimes it's removed and sometimes it doesn't, and it closes itself back up. So it will fool you and make you think that sometimes you can't even see a little hole like this. It will fool you and make you think the queen is still in there. But what can happen is a worker can get in there, get stuck, and she dies. So when you open it up, there could be a dead bee in there. Don't panic. It's probably a worker. The hinge closed itself up and the worker got stuck. Now, sometimes if there's more than one queen cell and a queen is out running around, the bees might decide to keep this queen encaged in here. They keep her like in jail. What they do is, as they don't allow her to open up the cap by chewing on it, they repair it as quick as she's opening it, but they leave a little hole like this and they feed her through that hole. They stick their tongue in there and they give her honey and all of that, and they take care of her because they might be thinking of having a secondary swarm. So they want to swarm with the first queen, and then they'll let this one come out. They could keep her in jail like that for a couple of days. That's not unheard of. So check those queen cells carefully and see what the bees have going on. And now, then you might see a queen cell like this. The bees, the virgin that emerged killed her sister. She chewed a hole through the side and stung her through the hole. So that's another way you might see queen cells in your colony. So emergency cells are usually up on the frame and all grouped together. So with supersedure cells or emergency cells, they're the colony's plan is to make a new queen, of course, and the time to choose the best larvae for making queens. Sometimes they don't always make that choice with an emergency cell, like I said. So what I would do is I would scrape this cell, and this cell if I knew these were emergency cells, because they were all made at the same time. You can tell because they're all in the same spot. These were probably older larvae. Sometimes the bees don't always make the best decision. These cells I would leave because I'm going to get a better queen from the choices of these cells than I am these. You might think, oh, these ones are further along. I'll keep these and scrape this one, and this one. But you might be getting, you probably are getting an inferior queen because that larvae was older. It might have been 4 or 5 days old. So just remember, don't scrape the open cells, scrape the closed cells. Newly sealed cells. So when you can tell when a queen is getting ready to emerge by looking at the cell. Newly sealed queen cells should not be handled. They're very sensitive to temperature, and also the queen cocoon that's inside that cell doesn't completely surround the queen pupa that's in there. The larvae can be moved away from the royal jelly if you don't handle the frames very, very gently. You can't take that frame and tip it upside down or anything. If you pull out a frame and it's got a queen cell in it, you have to handle it really gently and not let it get chilled. So you can see that this queen cell is all got the mottling all over it. And that's when she's developing. But as she gets close to being ready to emerge, the bees will thin down the wax. You know, you see this one's been thinned way down, and way down here, it's really thinned down because they're letting her get ready to chew through the cap and emerge out. You can see this one, the queen has emerged out, but look how much they thinned it right down to the cocoon. This is actually her cocoon that she spun inside that cell when she was metamorphosizing into the bee, from the larvae to the bee. Now the cocoon does not go across the base of the cell because that would separate the queen larvae from her food supply. That she continues to eat royal jelly the whole time she's in the cell. That's how she develops so quickly. So up here at the base is all her royal jelly. She spins her cocoon here, and on the sides the thickest, and on the bottom, actually there's debate on whether she actually puts some on the bottom or not. I've read sometimes they do spin on the bottom, and I've read they don't spin cocoon on the bottom. But then I've read that they thin the wax down to the cocoon, which just actually looks like they did here. But when you're looking at your queen cells, first of all, be extremely gently. You don't want to knock that larvae. You know, you don't know how big she is in there at this stage. So if I moved it all around a lot and jostled it a lot, she could be up here still feeding, but she could be small and I could knock her down to the bottom and she's gonna lay down there and starve or have to work her way back up to the royal jelly. So just be really gentle with those queen cells. So that's what it looks like when it's open. When you cut a queen cell open, you can see the royal jelly that she's still feeding on. This one was smaller. She hadn't completed straightening it out all the way. Her cocoon will be on the sides here, and the royal jelly up there. And I'm just showing you this, so if you do get queen cells in your hives, you're just really gentle with them, okay? Prior to that emergence, you're going to see them removing wax. So that's going to tell you my queen is close to emerging from that cell. The presence of that, when you see the presence of the cocoon on the bottom, you know that she's really close to coming out. So you can tell if the queen cell's been sealed for a long time or for a short time. So you haven't been in your hive for 2 weeks. And you see queen cells. That's going to give you an idea of how long that queen cell's been in there. So say you found these queen cells and you're on wax foundation, or you've made some queen cells and you want to move them into another hive. So after you've made some queen cells, you're moving them to another colony to emerge into the colony, which you're going to handle them very gently, even though they're more mature now. You still have to handle them really, really gently. And so what I do is I make a thumbprint into the wax like that with my thumb, and you can see it right here. Then I just very gently push the queen cell against that, and it sticks to itself because it's warm weather. And you know how wax, you've probably had it all over your fingers and then stuck your hand to the hive tool and all of that stuff. Wax can get sticky when it's warm. So I just stick it to the spot where I want the queen cell to go. And look what the bees do. They just attach it. They immediately work and attach that cell. And down here, I stuck on a double queen cell that I found by making my thumbprint into the wax and attaching that cell. And they immediately will attach that cell. So it's very easy to move them from one colony to another. And I have recovered laying worker colonies by giving them a frame of brood, open brood, because you have a laying worker because they didn't have open brood pheromone in the colony. And then a week later, giving them a frame of open brood and putting in a queen cell, and the queen will emerge and it will be their queen. Now, say you have a laying worker and you don't have any queen cells, but your friend has a bunch of swarm cells, and somebody in your bee club's offering extra queen cells because they've cut out about a lot of swarm cells. Just do this, just put in that frame of brood and attach that queen cell to the frame. Problems with queens is if they run out of sperm, your frame is going to look like this because it's going to be all drone brood. Or if you have a laying worker, your frame is going to look like this, or your cells are going to look like this, really loaded up with eggs. That was a severe case. So that could be your problems, and that's, you can fix that. You read in some of the older publications to take the bees out to the other end of the field and shake out the bees, and the laying workers can't fly back to the colony because they don't know where they live because they never came out of the hive, and all that stuff is what they used to tell us. I don't know how long time ago, but that's not true. That laying worker, she could be a forager too that's laying eggs. The only way to recover that is to be putting open brood into the colony to give them open brood pheromone, and then eventually get a queen into there, get a virgin queen into there, or I have really good luck with getting a queen cell. I've only really had a laying worker once in the past like 15 or 20 years that I can think of. Luckily, other people send me pictures and say, what is this? So I can use pictures. So I just want to end by saying never buy bees again. Keep those nukes. You can split your colonies and keep those nukes because they are the resources to maintain your production colonies. And then when you winter them over, like this one has been wintered over, if I lose a colony in this yard, I have 9 frames of bees right here to restock that colony with. So and I'm not going to tell you how to split your colony because you can go on YouTube. There's YouTube videos out there everywhere about how to split your colony. Just be choosy about your resource. I mean, go to a website for a club or a university, use a really good source. And remember, all beekeeping is local. You have to adapt that to what you can do in your area. And you can see I have a cleat of wood on the front of these hives because I was doing this setup way before they started making these commercially commercially, what I would do is run a table saw blade down on the inside, but it also would cut through the handle. And so I'd have to put a wooden board over there to fill up the gap. And then I just slide down a piece of masonite between the two colonies and put a 4-frame box on that. So in Nookskin, they can do everything a big hive is doing. They can make honey, they can draw comb, they can produce brood, they can house extra queens. They can make you money if you sell them. They can save you money because you have all the resources to, to keep your other production hives going. They can share feeders. They can share honey supers. Here they're sharing a feeder. That board is what I use for an inner cover. So they could go up, and what I would do is just put a queen excluder over that, so only the workers go up. The queens couldn't get up there and get into trouble with each other. So they're pretty easy to maintain because they're small colonies. And this was me this morning. I went out to my yard. We shoveled all of the snow. When I went out there, probably now a week and a half ago, you didn't even know these colonies were there. I shoveled about 18 inches of snow before I hit the top of the colonies. Luckily, I didn't have them marked with tall sticks or flags or anything. I knew it. I knew where they were. And then we shoveled out all around the colonies so I could put on pollen patties, and I put in an Varroa mite treatment. Then a few days later, I went back with my husband and a friend, and we shoveled all around the colonies to be able to set up electric fencing, because raccoons are out, and up here they can be devastating to a hive. In Maine, they can too, and they will rip the insulation around my colonies to shreds. So I shoveled around that, and then I set up some electric fencing. Now, of course, this electric fencing isn't going to stop a bear, because if they come down off this big snowbank, they're just going to land on the fencing, and those plastic poles are going to tumble over. But anyways, that's what I'm looking at right now. That was today in my bee yard. I did bring a couple bags of dry sugar, and I took off the tops and I put sugar on the inner cover today, because I have no idea how much food they have left in there. It's not like I can lift the back of the colony like I used to in Maine to see how heavy they are, because that's 2 pushed together and wrapped, and that's 3 pushed together and wrapped. And it's way too cold up here to be pulling frames to look at food or manipulate frames around. So that is my talk for tonight. And I guess I didn't get any questions, or Judith didn't interrupt me for questions.
I didn't interrupt you. I haven't gotten many questions at all. So anybody who has a question, just put it in the chat box now. You may not have been able to use the chat box at first, but it is open now. We do have a question from Kevin McDonald, who wanted to know, this was from really early in when you were first starting out, when do you feed with the 1-to-1 sugar syrup, and do you add robbing screens? And I think the robbing screens might have come from that nature.com article you had about the way about the visitation of the bees to other hives.
Okay. Oh, I actually feed a 1.5 sugar, 1.5 sugar to 1 water, because it doesn't tend to mold as easily as 1-to-1. If you've ever fed 1-to-1, you see that it gets that black mold pretty quickly if the bees don't take it down fast. So I started quite a while ago doing a 1.5-to-1, but I will feed liquid feed when it's warmer at night. Bees won't take cold syrup. So what I would do, if the colonies were right in my backyard, and say I only had 2 or 3 colonies, I would put syrup on during the day and then take it in at night, because if it gets cold during the night, they're in the morning, they're not going to want to feed on that syrup, because when bees get when they go up there and they take that cold syrup, they actually can't move because now they chilled their body. It's kind of like what happens when a bee lands on snow. It sits there and melts a hole down into the snow about a little, quarter inch, half inch, and it dies. So wait for it to be either be warmer, or I don't know what the temperature is in Maine down there, but up here at night, it's still in the middle 20s, maybe 28, 25 Fahrenheit. So I would give dry sugar now if it was that cold, and I could probably start liquid feed on my colonies maybe the first week of May. Hopefully our nights will be in the 40s by then. And what I might do is keep insulation around the colony still to help keep that syrup warm.
Okay.
And the robbing screens, they do help with the mite control. Like I said, I had problems in one yard because I have about 20 hives 1.5 miles from me, and it's a brand new beekeeper. And I think the mite control wasn't as good as it could be, because I just battled Varroa, and it was only 2 colonies that are in my own backyard. I have them there for pollination, but I battled Varroa in this yard so constant. And my other yards, I hardly had any Varroa at all. So if I keep bees in this yard again, which I'm doubtful, I will definitely put on robbing screens to keep visitors out.
Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say I only used to use them in the fall, but that has now changed since reading that scientific paper.
Okay, so from Karen Buzzle, you said that you use plastic frames versus wax. Can you explain why, please?
It's just easier. I used to use wired wax and wire in all my frames. Well, it was really 2 reasons. When you get up to 100 colonies, you would spend all winter wiring frames and get them ready for the next season. And when I started selling a lot of nucleus hives, a lot of frames are leaving my colonies, so I'm replacing them. So I would have to, be, I don't know, wiring a couple hundred frames or every season. And I found the wax will warp. So say I put in wax foundation and we get a really hot span of weather, the wax will ripple and the bees don't draw it out correctly. So you end up with a really on the fat side of the ripple, you end up with it cells like this deep. They can't have brood or honey in it. On the other side, it's too deep to draw it out for the bee space. It ends up like this deep. So the bees, the queen won't laying it. I was having problems with the wax foundation rippling sometimes, even with wiring. So I switched to plastic. It's just quicker and I don't get rippling wax. Now the plastic can be pressure washed and cleaned up and reused. So I don't have to feel bad about adding more plastic to the, recycle bin, because I reuse my plastic. So I guess that's my 2 reasons. It's quicker. And I tend to use more wood frames where I insert the plastic. That's what I build through the winter. But if the bees start getting ahead of me, I will get plastic, the whole thing, plastic frames, and with the foundation, the whole piece, the whole unit. Because sometimes, right now I'm working 2 jobs. I'm still working for the Native Women's Association of Canada, but I just was hired as the apiary inspector for the province of New Brunswick. So I'll probably be using plastic frames this year, though I do have 100 frames built ready to go.
Do you use any particular type of plastic frame, Karen?
I like acorn because they're nice and straight. I found if you look down or look at the frame right on the edge, looking right down, some of them have a little bit of a bow in them. So you have to take those frames and put them in all the same direction. A lot of times they'll have their name stamped on the top. So I have to have the name all on the same end, or the bows don't line up and I get that deep side and thin side again. So I just don't like combs drawn out like that. And as I said before, when that the young bees don't like daylight, and I have to switch the frame around sometime to put the part they're not drawing at the back, say it's in the bottom box down by the entrance. I can't do that if my frame is warped. I have to have the frames all line up correctly, so the bee space is correct for drawing that new wax out. So I like Acorn. I'm trying a new brand because I have to get that shipped from California. And so that's quite a job right there. So I'm trying a new brand made in Canada, and that I got 100 sheets of the plastic foundation from them to make another 100 frames. I'll see how I like them. It's a brand new company up here in Canada. Looks very similar to Acorn, so we'll see.
Okay, what are your thoughts on reversing hive boxes?
I have never really done that. I mean, I just haven't had to. My bees will go down. They always go down. So I just leave it up to them. It's just when you end up with a real lot of colonies, it's just extra work that to me wasn't necessary. Now, like I said, the queen isn't going to go on a frame unless it's over 93 degrees. The bees aren't going to draw wax unless the inside of that colony is 95 degrees. So, you know, if the weather was cold, I wouldn't reverse, because then I'm putting the cold box on top and the queen isn't going to be able to, the brood won't be able to stay as warm because it's not under the inner cover. Or I could split my brood, the brood area up in the colony by reversing and make it harder for the bees to keep warm, and then stress my brood and maybe get European foul brood. So I just have always left it up to the bees to make that correct decision for me. I can't say I can't ever remember reversing, and I have had bees since 1978. It's just something I guess my mentor never did it, and then I never did it, and I never found it necessary. But go for it if that's your management technique. And that's how beekeeping is. We all have our ways of doing things. So if that's how you manage your bees, then there's nothing wrong with reversing.
Next question, what age of brood are preferred for equalizing hives, or if there is one?
Capped brood. All capped brood. I'm gonna go, I can go back. I can go previous. Let me find that slide. You always want capped brood for equalizing. It's back a ways. There we go. The reason you want capped brood is because you're trying to make that weaker colony stronger, and you can't give them open brood because that just gives them more work and more mouths to feed, and they're weak. So that open brood is not going to fare well at all. And capped brood is going to emerge and immediately make that weaker colony stronger. And remember what I said about this bee will come out and she's going to cover 3 cells. So it's like for every one side of a deep frame that emerges bees, it will fill both sides of the frame with bees standing on the frame. Or 3 frames of, I got to remember this math right, or 3 frames of bees standing on the frame. But it's a vast amount. It's a good amount. And what I actually will do is pick off a cap and see this. Say I have 4 frames of cap brood, but I don't want to take them all. My first choice would be emerging brood. The bees that are emerging, if I look at a frame and bees are emerging, I want that frame out of there for equalizing, because A, I'm trying to prevent swarming of the stronger colony, and all those bees are going to emerge and just make that colony even more crowded. Okay. I want the weaker colony to be more crowded, to have more bees. So I will pick off the caps. Either I'll take all emerging, the frame with emerging brood, or I'll pick off one cap and a couple caps in an area, because the bees will just seal that right back up again when I put it in a colony, and look at the eyes. You know, the purple eyes stage, and then they go down to the black eyes stage. I'm looking for black eyes. So I know they're going to be emerging soon, because you don't want to give that weaker colony more work. You want to give them more workers, and you want to take workers away from the strong colony by taking that emerging brood or brood ready to emerge.
Okay, when you add new frames to a hive, how many new ones do you put in? And do you put them side by side or space them between drawn out frames?
It depends on how many frames I've taken out. So say I'm splitting a hive and I'm taking 4 frames. That's, I'm taking a frame of honey, a frame of 3 frames of brood, and a frame of pollen. Well, I wouldn't take 4. I would take, a 4, because I'm going to add a foundation to the split too, a frame of foundation. So I would be putting in 4 frames. So I try to work them in from, first I'll put a couple, maybe 2 into the center, where as long as I don't break the brood up a lot, and they can be beside each other. But I like a brood frame against them, because bees will draw out a frame faster if it's next to open brood than they will if it's off on a side wall. They're going to ignore it. So I try to get my foundation, as long as the colony is still strong enough to keep the brood warm, I try to get that foundation next to the brood area. First of all, I want to end the brood area where they draw worker comb, not on the outer edge where they're going to draw drone comb, because during buildup they want drones and they're more prone to draw drone comb. If I catch them drawing drone comb, I scrape it off and get them to start again. I might move it into the center more. But through that whole process of them drawing those 4 frames, I'm manipulating the frames around to get them to draw them the way they want. So say that frame ends up in slot 5 and it's against the brood frame and they've started working on it. They've committed to that frame. I will move it out a little. They've committed to the frame. They've committed to worker cells. So I can move it out a little out of the center of the brood nest and slide the next one over next to a brood frame to get them to commit to that one. Because once they start working it, they'll keep working it. But if they don't start working it, then they're not going to work it. The other thing you can do is, which I haven't had to do before, is spray a light syrup mixture on it to get them onto the frame. I do always put an extra coat of wax, of my own wax, on my plastic, just to give them a base to start working on. But it's a constant. I just don't put them in and forget them. I kind of manipulate them around into the hive, into areas to get them drawn the way I want them drawn. I don't just checkerboard all 4 frames in there because I'll break up my brood nest too much. But I don't mind if one is off to the side and not getting touched, but my other 2 are getting work done, because when the bees make the commitment and start drawing that out and say they've got a, the outlines of the cells started and a little teeny bit of wax coming out, I move that over and bring this one over that they're ignoring. So it's just a constant rotating through to get them to do what they're supposed to be doing for me. So
do you still have time for a few more questions, Karen?
yeah,
or
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So here's one. I like this one. Did you say you put on Apivar? Isn't it too cold?
No, Apivar just slides down between the frames. I just oh, there we go. Where did that slide go? I went by it too fast. I'll find it. Apivar. Don't do that. When it gets on a video, it's hard. There, no. Well, I don't, there it is. Oh, well, there would normally be an apivar in here, and there might be under one of these pollen patties. But what I do, it's cold here, yeah. I just lift up the cover and have the apivar all the sections all cut apart with my toothpick through, and I lift up the cover, and I can quickly tell where the brood area is because I'm experienced at looking. Like on this hive, the brood area is right here because that's where most of the bees are. And on my hives that I have all stacked together, I have to look and see where the brood area is, but I can tell by the bees that are on the frames. And I just slipped that strip down in there and I dropped on 2 pollen patties and closed them up. They weren't even open 20 seconds probably. Now on my colonies, where I'm going to go back to my last slide where I insulate them for people that live in the real cold like I do. Whoop. There we go. So I have this one sheet, their telescoping covers are off because they're all pushed together, touching each other. And then I have the inner cover on, and then I have that reflective insulation, that bubble wrap looking one. And then I have the bloom foam board that the reflective insulation is cut the size of each inner cover because I leave those on all year round. Then I have foam blue board, which is cut the size of each inner cover on top of the reflective insulation. Then I have one big piece of insulation that covers all the colonies. So there's 2 here and 3 there. So what I do is I take off the big white insulation, and I have 3 pieces of the blue insulation. So I lift up 1 piece of blue, and I do in 20 seconds, I can have that hive done, and they reflect the inner cover reflective and the blue insulation back on, and then I go to the next one. So they're not all uncovered at once. You see, I do it in a series like that. And then I just put the big insulation back on. That's my method. So in even my hive bodies, there's 2 pushed together, but they have reflective insulation wrapped around all the way around. And then they have this R5 foam all the way around, and they only have 1 opening. It's at the bottom. I don't give a top entrance. So when I found my colonies under that 18 inches of snow, and then on top of them, I dug down and I hit my insulation. When I found them, there was a big air bubble. So probably out as far as this pallet, it was open, and there was a snow wall, and it went up to the roof, and the roof had snow on it, of course. And then behind the colony was also another big air bubble. So they had been out here having cleansing, I guess cleansing crawls, I would call them, because they're not flying, but they can come out the bottom entrance and, clean themselves and go back in. I will open a top entrance soon, but not real soon, because that's just going to make the airflow go up and through the hive, and they can't control the temperature as well. So I will open the notch in the inner cover depending on the temperature, but probably in 2 weeks we'll see what the temperature does. But right now it's too cold. It's like 28, 25 at night, and during the day it's like probably 38, 37, right around in there. So I have 1, I don't leave an upper entrance. That's my my Canadian style beekeeping. Now in Maine, I never wrap my hives. I just use top insulation under the inner, right on top of the inner cover, and then on top of the telescoping cover, but nothing, I never put anything on the sides. So
Okay.
that's why I can open them.
Okay, here's one that is a planning ahead question. You mentioned that pollen is consumed as fast as it is brought in for the spring. What is the best time of the year to use a pollen trap in the apiary for next spring's apiary supplementation?
That would be when, that can be through July, through June, July, right through there. I would let would let the Maine Nectar Flow go by, because that's when your bees are really building up, and then they kind of level out, and that's when I would put on my pollen traps. And so you can collect that pollen and keep it in the freezer, and then put it into an empty frame and put that empty frame in the colony. I don't find bees, if I just took loose pollen, you know how you see when you're going through the hive and you get to the bottom board, you see balls of pollen on the bottom board. For some reason, they won't ever pick that up and use it. It's right there. They don't pick it up and use it. They clean it out of the colony. But if you rub that pollen you collected into a frame dry, or you mix it with honey and make like a pollen patty out of it, they will use it, but they won't pick it up off the top of a frame or off the bottom board.
Okay, so we'll just, it's almost 9, so one last question. At what day, night temperatures will you remove the insulation? And I just want to add also mouse guards. Why don't you tell us when it's time to remove those as well?
Well, I'll probably remove the insulation when the days are in the 50s. I'll see. What I plan to do is take off that outer layer and leave the reflective insulation for a while, because I don't want the bees to I don't want to change too drastically, because they're probably, by then they're going to have quite a bit of brood. So I will take off the first layer of insulation, all my solid insulation boards, and leave my reflective insulation. But pretty soon I'm going to have to, they're all pushed together. I'm going to have to pull them apart, and this pallet right here usually is there with a colony on it, and then they go down on the pallets for the 5 colonies. So, but if I find after I equalize one of them's not catching up to the others or something, I'll probably leave the reflective insulation on it to help them a little bit with the warmth. But this is a beautiful yard. This like we went there on a really windy, cold day to shovel the snow, and there wasn't a speck of wind. It's a nice little microclimate right in this corner of this field where this yard is. And I get the best queen's bread in this yard ever. So I'm keeping this yard. It's a friend of mine's farm. So yeah, I'll have to see. It's hard to tell, but I'd say when the days are in the 50s, I'll start pulling some of the insulation off.
Okay, well, Karen, thank you so much. It's been really informative. We also have a lot of thank yous for you on the chat board. So thank you very, very much. And everybody, remember to take the Maine Beekeepers survey and to sign up, get your hives registered. And again, I just want to thank Maine Bee Wellness for sponsoring this webinar, and also the $5 discount on new MSBA memberships for those of you who weren't here at the beginning. This video has been recorded, and it will be available to everybody. Just keep an eye on the website. That'll take a couple days. So just keep an eye on the website, and the link should be there. Everybody will have access to it. So with that, and thank you, Phil Fanning, too, for helping out tonight.
Okay, thank you everybody that attended. Good night.
Good night, everybody.